Docking request accepted.
Good morning, New Eden. Today is October 14th, 2024, and this is the Federation Frontline Report. I'm your host, Frozen Fallout, and today we have a very special guest. We are doing our continued interviews with the CSM candidates for CSM19. Today we have Luke Anninan.
Yes, you got it right.
Thank you for being on. It's an honor to have you on. So tell us, how did you get involved in EVE Online?
So, as a small story, so I originally tried to pick up EVE in about 2006, 2007. Couldn't get into it, right? There's no new player experience at that point. It's just, you're just dumped in space. I'm like, I can't do this. I tried the same thing again 5 years later. And then in 2018, it just so happened that a friend of mine was playing it. He'd kind of played the game and stopped playing the game and kind of come back and then kind of dragged me along his journey with him and kind of showed me the ropes. And at that point, it kind of stuck, right? Probably also because the moment I joined the NullSec Alliance, we went to war against Test, and I think that kind of kept me, it kind of kept the bloodthirsty bit there. And like, okay, this is cool. Let's do this, right? And then I've been playing pretty much ever since then.
Awesome. So what have you been up to recently? What's some of the things that you've gotten yourself involved in the last year or so?
So the controversial part is, so I am I'm co-CEO of Fraternity, so big bad alliance in the north, largely described as the Chinese alliance, but we're not, right? Like, I'm clearly not Chinese. I'm a Brit. So my day-to-day kind of EVE life is very much the how do we create content for all of the people that are part of the alliance so they can go out and play this game and enjoy this game sort of thing. Whether that's, putting plans in motion for the fights we had with Brave and B2 and the war in the north, or more likely in peacetime kind of going, right, how do we use Wormholes to go and find some things to do? How do we go do some whaling? How do we go and, make people ISK, because there will be always another war at some point, right? And kind of keep that wheel turning over. It's always a lot harder to find that content during relative peacetime. So it's just about making sure they can do that, and that's most of my sole job, as well as a whole load of ESI dev stuff.
So tell us a little bit more about that. What do you mean by ESI dev stuff?
So I obviously I'm an engineer in real life. That's my day job. So I do a lot of the kind of tinkering and maintenance of our kind of tech platform and our C platform and our Alliance Auth platform. We use all of them and mumble and make sure that's all working, as well as developing. And for some of our guys, if any of my guys are watching, this will be a new thing for them, developing a whole new Auth platform that will be the one that we use for our Alliance.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's the backbone of EVE is its ability to transmit its data outside of EVE, and then us taking. I mean, this game is called Spreadsheets Online, not because it looks like a spreadsheet, which it kind of does in certain ways. A spreadsheet with a chat room, with some pretty stuff in the background, which is really pretty, but. Then they've done a lot of changes to the API and then the ESI and how you can pull and extract that data. It's a very complicated thing, and I thank everybody that works on all that stuff, because I'm an incident manager, so I know like levels of I can do tech support. I understand the lingo. I get what's going on here, and if I needed to, I could dig and learn about a specific thing that I need to do. But that's not my day-to-day. My day-to-day is just ensuring that things get done.
I mean, interestingly enough, it was probably my day-to-day about 15 years ago. And then you kind of work up that kind of pole, right? And you kind of go further and further away from actually doing anything at the cold phase. And then a little while ago, I was like, I kind of want to do a thing. And Eve was the thing that I targeted to go and do some tech work on, because it's the game I'm playing all the time, and you know, I know what our requirements are. So it's like, yeah, why not build a thing?
Yeah, and the impressive likeness that of the architecture behind and the amount of infrastructure that 0.0 alliances put into this game, especially massive coalitions. And I think that that's something that, having been somebody that was a low secker, was got into some 0.0 stuff, went back, did a bunch of faction warfare, went out and did a whole bunch of 0.0, now back in faction warfare. I have a huge appreciation for the massive amount of infrastructure that goes into some of these 0.0 alliances and coalitions. There's a reason why you guys own a large chunk of the map and you have a lot of stuff going on in your alliances, because you actually have something that governments wish that they had as good of an infrastructure as you do.
I mean, interesting enough, it's actually a thing that's in my it's in my forum thread, right? Like, you're right, like big groups have these really big powerful platforms to kind of collect all the data they want and look at everything they need to do, which means you make decisions faster, right? Because you've just got all the data. You don't have to try and log into Eve and then get a notebook out or a spreadsheet and start writing it down and all the rest of it. But also, it is one of the issues. Like, the UI and the data available in game has got a lot better, so smaller groups can do more to administer some of these things, but like, that needs to kind of go further, right? Because from an infrastructure perspective, like you're right, like the infrastructure that we have as an alliance is probably more than I've got, like more infrastructure than some of my clients have, right? Like it's great.
It's unbelievable, and it's a testament to how awesome Eve is, but it is a testament also of how hard it is to break into that world, like trying to start over from the beginning. Hoppy with a huge raid of 69 people. Hoppy, I just got done hanging out with Hoppy a whole bunch at Vegas. I thank you so much for the huge raid here. We're talking with Luke right now. He represents the Fraternity and has like a strong backing, having been on CSM already and now is running again this year. And we're kind of going over the platforms here. So kind of tell me, what is your platform that you're kind of running on in general for CSM here?
So there are a number of things. Like, one of the reasons I decided to run this year was because obviously Equinox was a thing. It's kind of not really done yet, right? There's good things and bad things and questionable vulnerability windows of metanoxes that still need to be so there's a whole load of stuff there that needs to still be sorted. One of the big points of my campaign, and it has been for the last couple of years, has also been, how do we deal with the projection issue? It's like, a lot of people go, it's NullSec likes projection. Actually, it's too much. That needs to be curtailed. How I think the bit everyone disagrees with is how to curtail the kind of projection point. And then, like, the third kind of like slice is, there's a huge list of kind of like quality of life stuff that just needs to kind of be done, right? Whether that's, I don't know, the fact that PI is terrible, or the fact that you open up descriptions in game and there is a specific alliance director in my coalition that's really big on the fact that if you open up the description of moons, it just says the word moon rather than like narrative kind of flair sort of thing. And there's this whole list of small things as well, right? And it's really easy to go into CSM and go, these are the big things I want to get done, and you forget about all the little small things. But actually, from the day to day, it's the small things as well that kind of make the experience enjoyable.
So it just sparked a weird kind of thought in my head about some of the weird like low hanging fruit of descriptions and stuff like that. What is your point of view? And this kind of goes outside of CSM almost. I mean, what I think is well beyond that. But AI, how do you feel about it filling in some of these blanks? Or do you think that? And we don't need to talk a lot about this unless you're super passionate. You got something that you want to say. But
I mean, I could have a whole section around AI. Like, it's a big thing I do with my kind of day job. Could it help in those sort of situations? I mean, probably, if it's given the information to do it, right? Like, I guess the question is a slightly bad description better than no description?
mm-hmm.
But I don't want to fixate on the description sort of stuff, but things like that is the sort of stuff where you've got like a new player that joins the game, right? They can come in, it's a really polished new player experience. It looks like really modern AAA sort of game, and that's great. And then they see a drone in space and they right click on the I think it's the Ogre 2, it just says heavy drone, like no other description,
Right.
or you click on it and it just says moon, and it's just like little things like that are always like things that should
And yeah, there's an
tweaked up,
insane
right?
amount of little things. Like that's one of my big platforms is the little things because I got my expansion. Like I'm not here to be like, okay, faction warfare, it's time for us to be back up to bat again. It's like, no, you get it every like 6 or 7 years. I've been here since the beginning. I've seen how this goes.
Yeah.
And so this time, the whole thing is there's so much little stuff, that new player experience stuff that's going on. But if you had to say that, what's your most important thing that you want to talk about when it comes to your platform for CSM?
So I think it probably comes to two sort of things, right? Like, so one of the big challenges at the moment, I think, is the Equinox piece, right? Like now that directly affects me in the day to day, right? So like, it's always going to be close to my heart if that's, not in a great place. But also, to be fair, the whole projection issue, sizes of alliance issue is the big one, right? Because if you look at the health of the game for the long term, that's the big kind of elephant that's kind of in the corner of the room trying to hide behind the curtain, which is that the whole game generally is quite stagnant at the moment. I know NullSec, LowSec is kind of popping off in different places, but if you have static NullSec, that tends to make the outer rings of LowSec also quite static.
Mm-hmm.
So if you use the jump bridge one is a really good example, right? So we can move from our staging system to LowSec in about 2 jumps. We're not 2 jumps away from LowSec. We're about 10. Which means we can take moons there and we can do all of these things there and get there immediately if there's an issue. Whereas if you address those problems, then those outer areas of LowSec can become populated again as well, because the big block, the other side of the regional gate, can't just get there in 30 seconds if you're trying to mess around. So I think that's the big issue that needs to be addressed, because that dynamo needs to start up again. To me, projection is probably the big part of that. Again, though, everybody disagrees the right way of resolving that one.
Right. So Phantomite brought up the idea of bringing fatigue. I brought that up to Kisriel, and Kisriel said that there was something like that, not that he's pushing for it, but that if he was told that was going to be the thing, he would say a special type of jump fatigue. Is there any specific things that you have? It doesn't have to necessarily be related to that, but do you have anything say about that, or is there a different idea that you have?
So, I mean, interesting, the fatigue one, me and Fan were talking about yesterday, actually, on a different stream. I kind of go for the second type of fatigue, like a second timer kind of approach. I don't like the idea of blunt hammering with fatigue. I think it just rewards its tedium, right? Fleets take longer because they still go out and they take just longer to go everywhere because they're waiting for cooldown timers. To me, the right solution is something based around your capital and the distance from your capital. So the further you are from your capital, whether that's by light years or by gates, there's effectively a degrading distance or whatever that radiates out from that point. For that to work, you do then have to kind of make some other changes, like potentially remove ACLs on jump bridges, right? So alliances can't share their jump bridges, for example. So that sort of model then all of a sudden goes, well, realistically, I can project locally, which is a quality of life thing, right? NullSec do put in the upgrades, they do fuel these things, so a level of local projection isn't bad to my mind. That it's a quality of life for the people that live there who put the time into that space. But there becomes like an almost an arbitrary distance, which is kind of like, well, our empire can't go any further that direction because it's 4 jumps via gate further than the nearest jump bridge can get to it, and therefore it's just too hard to just hold on to it without forward deploying over there. But if we forward deploy over there, then somebody else can start poking on the other side, if you see what I mean.
So are you? I wonder, because this gets into the game head that I have when I look at Eve. I no longer see Eve on and I've never played Eve at this level. I've tinkered in it, and I've spoken with a lot of people, partied with years and years of partying with people that are at some of the highest levels of the 0.0 experience of how it feels like to play Stellaris as Eve Online. Are you familiar with like Stellaris, CK2, that kind of stuff?
I am loosely, yeah.
So the reason why I bring that up is because I feel like Stellaris has a problem that came about because it's a 4X strategy game and not a grand strategy game. So in the grand strategy game, there's plenty of room for vassalization. There's plenty of room for multiple kingdoms to be all over the place. Everybody gets to play a little bit more like it's, you know, you don't have there's many reasons not to go further than you can stretch. Now, every time a player picks it up, though, of course, conquer the world is one of the first things that you try and do in these games.
Yeah.
And so as Paradox started to learn, they were like, okay, so now we need to reel in conquer the world in CK2. And they got it to in CK3 to a point where it was really hard sometimes to really conquer the world, like because of all the malices that come with owning and controlling so much space. I was really excited with the current expansion when it came out because it felt like there might be a possibility of this becoming more and more like Stellaris, but I fear, or more and more like CK2, but I fear it's more and more like Stellaris, where it's much better. Yeah, we'll give you some malices to like growing, and there's some benefits to being a couple of systems, but really, if you're a couple of systems, you're nothing in this game. And there's no reason to own a couple of systems. Whereas CK2, there was a reason to have your own little empire that ran just a small couple countries, and that's what everybody did for the most part, besides the player coming in and being like, I'm going to root. And then when players played against each other, they had to be careful about that malice of overgrowth, because they weren't just playing against idiot AIs now. What do you think what do you think about the idea of adding in some kind of malice to being a big empire when it comes to workforce and stuff like that? Because right now it's better to just always own the next system over in this system. There's no malice to owning that next system over to you, and especially with the way that how protected the planet or the skyhooks are now. It's no longer a thing of like, if you stretch out, then you have to defend all that space. Now the defend of that space is once again toned down to a thing that, yeah, you could, owning the next system over, it's much better to have the reagents and the workforce that can come out of that system. And even if it doesn't give you that, it might help you get the next system over, which has that, you know, because some systems are going to be kind of dead, but you need them to get to the next system over to chain it, to get it. And there's not really a reason not to grow at this point.
So I think there's a couple of different things to unpick there. I mean, on the skyhook thing, I kind of, don't get me wrong, I think the skyhooks in their previous iteration had issues. I think the current iteration now, the pendulum has kind of gone way too far in the opposite direction into the defenders camp, right? Like I kind of feel like if you didn't have the vulnerability window and you just had the secure and non-secure silos, that would have probably done enough. So the people that are looking after the space are going to get something, and maybe more if they defend it. But everybody can go and raid it. Whereas the vulnerability window, and you know, it's an hour every 3 days, kind of too short. So that's kind of that part, right? Now the spreading out thing is really interesting, because this is the tall empire versus wide empire kind of debate. And in the previous iteration of Solve, very much encouraged just growing out, because it wasn't the most rewarding space to live in. Like if you compare like NullSec to like Poshville, for example, right, or you know, Wormholes prior to some of their recent changes, NullSec isn't the most profitable part of space that people like to think it is. There are activities that are profitable, but it just encourages scaling outwards, right? My big fear is the Equinox, as it currently is, again, just requires you to go wide, because there's nothing to stop you from going wide. And you can't make your space productive enough to just go, we don't need this, we can have like 4 or 5 constellations, we can make it super productive by living here and working here. Therefore I might as well just scale out. The other challenge the game has is, not the game, geography matters. You know, Eve, if you look at like the old Solve maps, there's always certain contiguous parts of space that one group will always hold because of jump ranges. You know, the Delve scenario is a really good example, right? Like there are certain gates that, you know, the TCAG Magic Gate, for example, right? Like you're going to hold that space if you want to hold the space adjacent to it, because that's the pinch point to defend your kind of empire, right?
Yep.
That also drives peak groups to grow out, because they go, well, I'm going to grow out to those pinch points around my space, And then the problem is, if they take one more system, then all of a sudden they've got to grow out to that next pinch point, right? So
yep, and it's always the justification
right?
of getting that next system over is because you want a barrier between your pinch point and, I mean, it's like in Stellaris, you get that pinch point and you're like, yes, and then you're like, oh, but the next one over, that would help to have that one.
Which is why I think there needs to be some form of paradigm that kind of goes, this is the widest you can realistically go before the amount of effort involved in maintaining something of that scale is disproportionate with any form of benefit. Whether that's, every jump from a capital system, the ADM degrades. So eventually you get to a point where you physically just can't, drop a soft hub there anymore because the ADM is too low, or whatever, right? It creates a natural, sprawl distance to kind of go, this is as far as you can go. Other groups will obviously have the same sort of thing, and then that means, in theory, space kind of opens up between those blobs, right? Because you want to hold certain areas that are defendable, but you're just going to not hold the stuff that's not defendable because it's, a big issue to take the space. It's far from your capital, so you can't maintain it, and then there's space for other groups to start throwing up in the cracks, sort of thing. Because every NullSec group at some point, like the modern NullSec groups, kind of grew up in the cracks somewhere. They just managed to accelerate to a point where they were, they were able to compete at a level. But at the moment, there are no cracks.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of. It's interesting to see the history of Eve and what it's been, because like having played it for pretty much all of its existence, or at least watched it during, because like you said, when you started up, I started up in like 2003 when it was like, what? You don't get nothing. You don't understand anything at all, and you're just like, So 3 minutes later, I was like, oh, looked great idea. Let's watch this. But yeah, in 2006, I really picked it up. But then I listened to a lot of like Empires of Eve and Empires of Eve 2, and I'm interested to see what's going to happen with Empires of Eve 3, because they go from 2000, they're going to go like 2015, I think, to like 2024 or so. He's trying to get up to date. And if he does do that, this is like a time of stagnation. I feel like he's going to have to go to low sec, and he's going to have to, because there's not as much that's happened in 4 years.
So what have you had since 2015? Did you say 2015 to 2024? Is that the range you said? So what's happened in that time? So you have
the Casino Wars, I think, is one of the, because that's where he kind of left it last time, was like the Casino Wars.
That was ETACR. That was before that, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember what was in that time. So in that rate, that was 2014. So that's just before. So that would have been the back end of Empires of Eve 2.
Yep.
So you've got UALX. Pretty sure it was 2017. I want to say the big fight in UALX. I'm talking from a null perspective, obviously.
Right. And this is what he focuses on, because that's all he cares about. And that's in the stories of Empires 1 and 2 are epic. Like, it's just the craziness that happened, the falls of empires, what things became after, how things formulated to where they are. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a lot, I think, that
there's stuff there, but there's not as much.
Especially in the last 4 years, I feel like it's been super stagnant. Like, since the last time that Goons lost all their space, I feel like there really hasn't been much more than just little groups. We
had World War B2 during COVID, right? Like, that was fairly large. That was Goons contracting down to like one constellation, right? So that's what
I mean. That since they lost all their space, so that would be what, 3 years then? You're right.
About 3 years.
So yeah, about 3 years.
You had the B2 thing in the north. You had I'd say the war with fire, but it wasn't really a war though.
Yeah, there's like little thing, and there's like some allowance for, we want to create a space for people to come and build up, and then they found out, or from my understanding is like when they opened up the south east, that it was one of those things where medium-sized alliances were just beating the crap out of like slightly large alliances, a little bit bigger than all the other medium alliances, were just beating up on all of the medium alliances, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm just thinking of something else that I was going to say about how do you fragment the blocks, sort of, because this is the conversation we're kind of having, right? And I know I know you interviewed Kaz earlier, and that's a big thing on his kind of list as well, right? I'm
Absolutely.
sure he brought it up. But one of the there is one big challenge of all of this, which is communities, right? There was a time where all these alliances were their different communities, and they've kind of come together and become a much larger community. And the hardest thing for CCP to have to navigate when it comes to kind of like how do you break up some of these groups, how do you make it so they want to fragment, is you're effectively going, how do you change the game in such a way that you go, your community is not valid and you need to break up your community of friendships that now exist.
I mean, it
That's
almost mirrors like
quite
real life
complex.
politics to a certain
Yeah,
degree.
yeah.
You get two sides of eventually that gobbled up everybody that was big enough to say that they were something different, and now just call them this group and this group. And even though there's a bunch, I would say that at least Eve Online does have doesn't mirror U.S. politics, because it's there might be two dominant empires, but I don't. When I see Pam Fam around, I'm excited. Like most of the time, or when I see goons, I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. People who do not know what NullSec means, like, and sometimes I'm wrong. It's like, ooh, no, these guys know what NullSec means. That's cool. But or to jump on Snuff, so that I've seen you guys come in and help us with Snuff a lot. And it was, not that it was helping in the sense that it was like preventing them from we got to get on a lot of dread kills, you guys got to get on a lot of dread kills, and we got all to have fun around some structures and stuff like that.
Fraternity and Snuff have a weird relationship. Sometimes we leave each other alone, and then there are other times when we're just trying to kill each other continuously and losing a trillion ISK over a Poco. That was the thing that happened once. That was Tau baiting with a Revenant, if I remember correctly. But yeah.
So is there if breaking up the blocks is number one, what would you say your number two thing that you want to, this is the second most important thing besides that?
So obviously it's breaking up the blocks, making the null livable though, right? Like it can't be break up the blocks and make the space rubbish, right? So that's the kind of Equinox kind of stuff, right? That's probably the second one on my list. And then, to be honest, my next thing really starts to fall into like Kashol's territory of like how do you foster players and get more people playing this kind of silly video game that we all play, right? That's where I then default back to, because having the game in a much more active state, if you break up the blocks and stuff, or however you want to put it, is only really useful if there are more people playing the games to write their stories.
Yes. Yep. No, that's Kashal. I talked to a lot about this, which was like, what do we do with player retention? So if you like, I would imagine that saying this, you would understand that we're in like one of the worst shapes of almost any video game for retention. Most people who pick up this game drop it almost instantly. However, we do have the ability, as soon as you touch Eve, you can maybe get back into Eve. And like you said, when I first started, it took me 3 years before I really started playing Eve, and I'd always touched it after that. What are some of the things that you think though would really help out with the very beginning of retention? Is there anything that you see as like an immediate hurdle to the day one player?
Yes, I mean, actually, me and Kashol talked about this on the stream. So I played the MPE again last week in preparation for Kashol's show, because actually I played it a couple of years ago when it first came out, and the An iteration came out, and I played it again. I always find it really jarring that the last mission is basically mining. Like, we know the special source of Eve is building communities, right? You find a group of people you want to fly with, you build a community, you go off and do a thing, you start to create your own stories. Like, we know that is, that's the thing that keeps players around. I mean, heck, I'm pretty sure CCP have done numerous presentations on the fact that people that join corporations, I'm not saying NullSec corporations, I'm saying active corporations, tend to stay longer playing the game. So for me, the biggest bridge has got to be, how do you get players from the end of the new player experience to finding a group of friends in game? I'm not saying that's necessarily join a community. It's how do you put them in a situation where they've got to interact with each other, whether that's you have to kill X number of capsuleers in your home system, or team up with somebody else, or whatever, right? There's loads
Direct
of different
friendship.
options.
I think that faction warfare, personally, I think is a really great community to bring people into. It's one of my big pushes for the NPE experience to branch out and really give you a walkthrough. But I also think that like Eve rookies and Eve University, like the thing about it is that there's a lot of them about them out of game. I wish you got to be really careful. My whole thing about it is like this is a really delicate balance that CCP will have to do on it, but I think it would be so much more helpful to have like a community spotlight in game that showed these are the different communities, these are all the different like anybody day one can like jump into a frigate and once you've got through the NPE experience that gives you like how do you move around, but also expand on that a little bit so that when they jump into a fleet, maybe even have them join up with an NPE fleet first that does simulates what it is like being part of a EVE Online fleet. Like a line jump, target this, blow that up. Okay, like okay, now you got the basics down. You can just jump, just follow the FC around, and a point and a little bit of DPS can be really helpful. Especially the point can be so helpful.
So the question then, though, is, and this is always the risk that I think CCP have with these moments, right? Is so we're saying friendship is the thing that keeps people to stay. And I genuinely believe that probably is the single biggest retention point of EVE, because EVE is a game of its time. It's not. What's the best way of putting it? Newer generation players. So there's a couple of things I do outside of my EVE life, which is very much in the gaming space. That I won't go into too much, but if you look at games from 10 years ago, 20 years ago to games now, there's a lot more around things like instant gratification and stuff being the sort of thing that exists in modern video games compared to what would have existed 10, 15, 20 years ago, which were far more slow burn. It's about the story, it's about the being in the game rather than just about winning the game, right? Like the fact that EVE is a game that has no real win condition. I mean, I think the win condition is quit playing EVE. So so you've got that problem, right? So the friendship thing is the way you overcome it. The question is, how do you signpost to different groups without being accused of favoritism as well? And that's where it starts to get really difficult, right?
Yes.
Because that's where it's like if you signpost it to EVE rookies or Galmill or Calmill or whoever, right? It's like, we're not getting CCP signpost to us, and then all of a sudden there's a long post on Reddit from the other people that are not getting that. We got a dog coming in behind you. So that's the bit that I don't know the answer to. Now, it could be that there's a simple solution, which is there is, let's take the faction warfare. There are certain militias that are, player run or volunteer run, which are the kind of community militias before people break out. So you bring everyone into a community that's a slightly more curated community that's a bit more controlled, and then they can kind of move out into other corps. That might be like another option, if you see what I mean.
Interesting. Yeah, you wouldn't even need to make it faction warfare. You can even just make it, a generalized. Here's the first community, but you'd have to get people on board with the either CCP dedicates resource to actually have that be a CCP community, and and like you have like a direct interaction with employees or volunteers of CCP that would maintain a community that's for the Galente, Caldari, Amar, and Minmatar. Which would be that's interesting. I haven't heard about that. I think that's a really interesting concept.
There's lots of different approaches to that. But I think that's the approach that needs to be taken, right? Is getting people into some form of community that is somewhat slightly more controlled. Because there is a lot of risk with certain corps, right? You go into a corp and it's a dead corp and all the rest of it, and then the player kind of just quits the game, basically.
So I'm just checking out some of the questions here. So Steve Haven says here, but the effort is dependent on personnel, right? If there is a static cap, you can ask for 10,000 people to live in the same space as 1,000 people could. Personal growth would mandate growth of space, correct?
I mean, ultimately, yes, right? That's what we've kind of covered. I think point though would come down to you would get to a point where you could only go so wide. So if a unit of space, whatever that is, let's call it a system for now, can maintain X number of people, you then get to a point where you kind of consume the amount of space that you can reasonably control as governed by the mechanics as the game would allow you to hold that space comfortably. And then you either have to go, right, we want to grow bigger, but we now need to find other ways of generating, stuff to do and wealth, whether that's, some people branching out and doing an alliance wormhole program, right? Which at some point could probably end up fracturing and being a whole new wormhole corp or alliance that kind of grows there, right? If you push groups to a point where they have to diversify the content they're doing in order to, grow, you have a higher chance that those groups are going to fracture because they're going to go do that content, really enjoy that content, and then they realize their home is now this system in Iridia rather than this system in Vale of the Silent, because that's where the content is and that's what they've kind of branched off to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Also,
I'm trying to work out on the second question. Am I accused of being Asterothi or someone else?
no, they're just because I went on a show for somebody else.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, so there's definitely a lot of different little things that we could focus on. Is there any specific ones that you have on your agenda right now besides the descriptions? Is there any ones that you think really need to have a focal point on fixing that could help that new player experience?
Just have to give me a second to think
Absolutely.
from a new player perspective. I mean, I do like what you said about spotlighting groups. I think that's good. I think the corp finder process needs to change quite dramatically. I think it's what people put on there, right? It's like, I'm going to tick this box, this box, this box, this box. Now, interestingly enough, I think it's there as a bit of an ISK sync, right? You pay for your ads, but I think if you just kind of got away with the ISK thing, and when every corp is listed on there, but it's a dynamic system, you can't control what's put on there, and it goes, if you said PvP, well, actually, you've got no PvP kills as a corp in X amount of time, so you can't be called a PvP corp, right? So you then at least start to advertise correctly. I think that'd be a really quick thing to do to allow players to go, right, this is the sort of game I want to play. Oh, actually, this corp, I want to go mining. I mean, I don't know why anyone would go mining. I'm not a big mining fan. I find it quite boring, as you can tell from my MPE comment. But if all of a sudden you've got, well, okay, this corp has mined, whatever unit of material, and that means they've now got the mining badge on their corp, and you're a player that's kind of taken with doing the mining thing, well, they're active because they've got the mining badge, and it's saying they're active because the system would track that dynamically. They're into that activity because they can only have that badge by actually doing that badge, which means you're likely to go there and not to be disappointed. That's a really simple thing to do, for a given level of simple, right? Like, you have to do the calculation, but I don't think it's the most complex thing to do in the world that I think would disproportionately allow players to go and find people.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like you said, there's a delicate balance of being like, you have to make sure that you don't have favoritism, but that's not favoritism by holding down what the you have to be this type of corp to advertise.
Not favoritism at that point, right? That's just the system has looked at your corp's profile and kind of gone, this is what we class you as, right, based on the activities you're doing in space. If that's not what you like being referred to, well, maybe go do something else then, because the system is just working it out, right? Like that, I think that level of dynamic advertisement would get over a lot of players joining corps that are either not active because they've just we know there are corps out there that just put adverts up, right, and just harvest new players who then go there to not do anything, and then either manage to find an active corp or just leave. But also means you just can't lie basically about what your corp's doing and when they're active and what activities they're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was talking with another CSM candidate. I can't remember who that was off the top of my head right now. Vegas is making me blurry, but one of the things I want to make sure, is there anything that we haven't covered yet that you're very passionate about with EVE Online that you want to get in before we wrap things on up here? We've still definitely got some time, but I just want to make sure that we have any time dedicated to something that maybe we haven't touched on that you really want to get involved in.
No, honestly, no. Right, it's kind of always difficult when you're on year 3 as well, right? Like, it's kind of, okay, now I want to ramp down the stuff I was done. For me, the big things for this year are, things like the small things for player retention, but also trying to get over the line. What does SOV look like? How do we make it more dynamic? How do we stop it from being super stagnated? When I joined the CSM, I kind of want to walk away from the CSM at the end of, if I get elected again at the end of my term, and kind of go, okay, the game is left in a better place than it was at when we started. And I think at the beginning of, if you kind of cast your mind back to CSM, so CSM19 was when I started on the CSM, so that would have been 2022. And the game was in a pretty awkward spot at that point. I think we were at a real low point in terms of kind of like the numbers at that point, if I remember correctly. That was before Havoc, before faction. Yeah, that was before the faction warfare stuff. So it's kind of moving in that direction, right? Like NullSec has kind of woken up a bit more with faction warfare. And I think if we could crack the nut of going, okay, how do we make Null more dynamic again? And kind of a little bit more active and places for new groups to kind of come into. I'd walk away as a happy person, kind of going, okay, this is a better ecosystem than it was when I started.
It's interesting because we have no reason to fight over space in faction warfare, and our space fighting is more dynamic and fun and creates that thing of insanity that, and they said that they kind of wanted to bring some of that, and even though it's dynamic and fun, but it's also, there is stagnation to a certain degree. Like, our battle lines haven't really moved since things have happened, but they have at certain periods of time. That pushes have happened, and just the natural flow kind of comes back.
That's the planet side kind of mantra, right? Like, and actually, have you ever played Planet Side 2 or familiar with it?
A little bit. I'm familiar with it.
So Planet Side 2 effectively is just an FPS with quadrants, right? And everybody takes the quadrants. There are 3 different groups, and over the course of a 24-hour period, you know that out of the 3 factions, one's NA heavy, one's AU heavy, and one's EU heavy. So you just see the lines bounce backwards and forwards continuously. It doesn't really matter. They all end up at the exact same point because the capture and the territory is kind of secondary to the content that's enjoyable. If you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
Will always reset back to that point because that's not really the point. It's the PvP, right?
The PvP is the point. Although I kind of advocate for, I think we should have a little bit more farm in fields. And so we should have a little bit more reason to have backline systems that have been backline systems forever. And they should spawn better anomalies. Stuff for other people, not just faction warfare people. This should be get other people into low sec faction warfare area, because there's all these goodies that are in these backline systems that nobody from the war zone goes into because they've been protected. So let's get some farm and fields out there that can be cultivated by pretty much anybody.
And is that like, I'm curious. I'm not a big faction warfare person, right? I think that's my CCP interview. Like, the thing I know the least about is faction warfare. Is there a reason why people that do faction warfare don't then go and make their risk in the backline systems? Like, is it just that's not the sort of player, and actually the backline system's kind of a bit weird for that because it doesn't really facilitate?
Well, the backlines don't mean anything. You can't make money there. You can't find fights there. There's no reason to be on the backline systems in any way, shape, or form as an actual, the only thing you're getting is insulation to your base of operation. So if you hang out in the back lines, you got more places, more jumps to get to where you want to go to fight. To reship, you have to go many more jumps in order to reship. So you always live on the front lines for the most part. Even my hate will probably always be my station of operation for sure, but like if we're pushed all the way past Devon, I've got to stage my shit now out of the next frontline system and then reinforce from there. But we're gonna fly the fleet or have easy access to reinforcements and stuff like that in system on the front line, because everything's about frontline stuff. That's where all of our plexes, all of our content is. There's some weird stuff in the back zone that can be scanned down that can be used for listening posts and stuff like that, but it's very few and far between for that content, and it's extremely minor. Like, we don't have the ability to build up a bunch of, have a haven spawn every 30 minutes or whatever. Even if we had it on like an hour timer of a haven appears every 30 minutes and a bunch of other cool things, it's dangerous, but I think you would pull in a lot of people from low sec or high sec that would go, whoa, there's all these riches
That's
out here that I don't need to go to 0.0 for. I don't have to worry
that,
about
that's why I was
bubbles.
that was why I was asking, like, would that create a more slightly dynamic ecosystem in fact warfare where you've got the PvP stuff, but you do still have that farms and fields, and you have the people that are the kind of farmers, so to speak, that want to do that bit, but then they're also producing things and kind of contributing to their alliances from the stuff they're doing in those backline systems. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, and I could see more of like this idea of like there's a reason to blue people in low sec besides snuff, and stuff like that, that you got to pay for and stuff. Like it builds a little bit more of a.
Bluing people in low sec, aren't they dirty words? Like, I thought that was your whole thing, was no blues.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is that for pirates, I would say, yeah, you don't, because you'd want to farm you want to farm the farm and fields, right? For
Yeah.
some of the Galente, though, we might want to work together on farming the farm and fields. But I bet you, me personally, you'll find it hard to get on the Yavangir, which we're not even a backline system at all, because we're not it. Yavangir, our technical home, is not in faction warfare. It's one jump from Hades, so it can never be cocked up. We can't get knocked out. We can always put our home station there.
Yeah.
We got tons of cool stuff there. But the there is so if there was a reason to move into Hades to build up a cultivate a farm and field and to make it a backline system, I would like be so excited about that. And because more than it would still be hard for me to get on that for you to blue me, because I want to farming that, but I want to make it worthwhile for you to come out in cruiser. You don't need to. I take back actually havens. I say more sites that are just easy to do in cruisers, frigates, destroyers, stuff that you can get a little blingy with, but also is really easy to just throw at low sec and keep on dying. And I think like a new player experience should be go out to low sec and die. But don't quite say that. You're like, here's 20 missions in low sec for you to complete. You should do it in a frigate, like, and then
dying is always an interesting one for new players. Like, I remember when I lost my first ship, and I was like, oh no, what we're gonna do now, right? Like, I think the new player experience tries to do that with the loss of the Astero.
But it's so
I'm not
fake.
entirely convinced that it does. Yeah,
it's that's the reason why I think like send them out to say like have like big bold letters of like you're probably gonna die on this mission set, but that's okay. That's Eve, and then like here's like a bunch of stuff to do that's in a frigate that at the very least you're gonna get caught by some stupid gate camp, at the very least, but probably you'll get even killed running the mission and stuff like that for if you do it long enough, you have it a big enough chain. And then at the end, if they still haven't died, be like, okay, now we just want you to just follow the random points that you just have them waypoint to until they find a gate camp,
I still think, I said this to Kashal when we were talking about this last week, I still think one of the really interesting things that could have been done with faction warfare and new players would be, if you are a new player that joins a militia, however you calculate what a new player is, right, whether that's SP, whether that's days playing, whatever, you're effectively just given a care package, basically. Because then you don't care about losing it, but you still do kind of care, right? Hopefully you've got the competitive edge before you've lost it. I think there are some little bits there that would be quite interesting. I mean, I know they've started to do. I know CCP and the GMs kind of jump in. If you like a new player loses their ship, they'll get a message from a GM and they'll, occasionally get like a care package and stuff to replace their ship and things. But I think there's a lot more that could be done there. And I do think faction warfare is an interesting area to funnel newer players because it's kind of already set up, ready to go.
Right.
Null requires you to make the big scary voyage across low sec into 0-0, and also probably isn't necessarily always the best place for new players.
No, yeah, I mean funneling to 0.0, I think that is a great thing to do by communities. You're already going to have the communities out there that are going to funnel and have their own newbie corps and stuff like that. That'll push that kind of stuff. Faction warfare is a nice like open thing where it's like, okay, if you don't know how to get involved in communities and there's too many communities for you to choose from, here's just your default community from your race basically that you chose, and the default is pretty good. Like the one thing we need to fix up is like at the Galente I don't have to deal with this much. Many of the other people have to deal with this, which is AWOXing, because a new player experience when you get blown up by somebody that was supposed to be your friend, and maybe you even have set your overview correctly, played for a little while, and now all of a sudden somebody's just starting to shoot you, and you're like, what's going on? Like, I don't even see what's happening.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some. That's an interesting one. How do you fix it? Like, I've heard a couple of times, maybe the way of doing it is if you kill a blue within X amount of time, you don't get any LP or something. Like,
Right, it kills the LP
not
farmers.
sure.
Then people who just want to kill people, I think that and I like that one for the LP farmers, but this Luke dude is everywhere.
So I
Ah,
saw
how's
it,
it
and
going?
then I saw who it was, and I'm like, okay, fine.
um, but
But I think that could be interesting, right? Like, if you have to deal with the AWOLs, then fine. It's how you deal with that. But I think it would be a good place to funnel the new players, I think.
yeah, my other thing is just let war decking happen. If you're not in the newbie NPC corporation, then you've opened yourself to being war decked if you enlist or you allow for people or you join or you join up strictly with your corporation or alliance. Like all of that, you just go back
Yeah,
to the old war deck system. That yep. So let Civil War begin. You don't like getting shot by the dudes doing shooting, or you don't like the LP farmers. Go fucking hunt them down. They're enemies now. Like.
I mean, war decking is a whole other thing about how explaining that to new players is.
Yeah, that is a next level of thing, for sure. And which is
Yep.
why I like the one that hurts the farmers, because that's the big one that are gonna hurt the farmers. Is like if you can't collect LP, people aren't gonna be shooting each other anymore. And it still
Yeah.
is like, oh, I accidentally shot somebody, but whatever. I guess I don't get some LP for a little while. Like that. If I
Yeah,
did
and then
that, I probably am in a PvP feed anyways. So.
you kind of come full circle as well, right? Because we started talking about tooling, and one of the big issues with that sort of model is, again, it's tooling, right? It's how do you get new players into a thing where they can interact with people? Like, are you going to try and convince them to get onto an auth system and then onto a Mumble or a TeamSpeak and talk to these other people? I mean, that's a hard curve for a lot of people, right? Like, people are used to games that might have integrated voice clients. I know Eve did once upon
For
a
a
time
little
have.
while,
Yeah. And that maybe didn't work the way they anticipated it to. But again, that's an example of a tool that exists outside of the game. These big groups kind of implement that. I think if you want to bring players into these communities, you have to try and work out how you can facilitate that, even if it's at a slightly lower level. Sorry, I just moved over to look at Twitch because it's on a completely different monitor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just seeing what.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that's one that you know more about than I do.
Yep.
Actual warfare comment.
But yeah, I find that there's a lot that we can possibly do here. There's a lot of enhancements that are just little things that are possible, and I'm glad that you're on board with that, because that's something that I think needs to make sure is on the agenda for CSM, because I feel like my big thing with CCP is that they pick something up, they start playing with it, and then they just drop it and they forget about it forever. I'm glad that didn't happen to faction warfare, but there are a lot of things, like for example, like epic arcs were supposed to be like a whole thing, like really easy for them to whip these things out and to just like build. They've had the whole system there, and then they built like what 5 of them, and it was like, oh.
Yeah,
Or no,
I mean, I
there's
think
like what 8? There is like 8, isn't there? Because it's all the pirates, and then
all the pirates.
the Garist, or all the empires, and then the. Even though I actually don't play the Empire arc missions. I did. When they first came out as a new player, I was kind of excited. Well, I guess I wasn't. I could still say I'm new. I still feel like I'm new to this game. 20 years later, I'm like, I have no idea.
It's still, yeah, it's a lot. Like, it was a big game, right? But I think I'm just going to go with something. And everybody on Twitch, if they're not aware, I'm heavily pain medded at the moment, so I kind of drift off halfway through a sentence. Yeah, I've lost my chain of thought.
No, not a problem. So
you said something that I was going to respond to, and it's gone.
I think one of the things that I want to make sure that we get in here is a chance for you to give a shout out to anybody, any people that you've worked with, or any people that have helped you or mentored you, or as part of your team, your mom and dad that I'm sure are watching. Any shout outs that you would like to give.
I mean, mainly for me, it's a shout to anybody that has kind of interacted with me as I've done CSM stuff previously, right? Like I said at my CSM interview show, like, I'm one of the people, I know I don't know everything, right? So I will try to reach out to different communities and find those people that want to sit there to some, NullSec are asking a load of random questions about a subject they don't know anything about, so that I can start to kind of form a kind of opinion to kind of help facilitate those conversations back with CCP, right? Like the interesting thing you said, they've iterated on the faction warfare stuff, and the thing that CCP need is data, right? Like the most important thing when trying to collect kind of community sentiment is like demonstrable information that you can take back to CCP and go, here is a problem, this is why it's a problem, can you iterate on it? Rather than just going, this is a problem because we're saying it's a problem. Because if you just go into it with a kind of, this needs to be fixed, but I'm not going to give you any information to kind of substantiate why this needs to be fixed, they'll just not respond to it.
Yeah, no, that's backing up the LP store. I've got a bunch of people in the faction warfare community that are like, we need to completely and utterly change up the LP store, and here's why. Here's all the numbers that we ran on how this goes. With the player-owned market, it's a little bit harder to like gauge some items on the LP store. They fluctuate for sure. And yeah, you're talking mission need beacons removed, or at least make people in NullSec work for combat. No, they just get rid of missions. Like, it doesn't matter. We already got rid. Way to go, CCP! You got rid of missions by making them useless. I'm fine with that. For faction warfare, fuck faction warfare missions. They were stupid and just farmed the hell out of. And it was so annoying watching people like if they made it like a group activity or something, but that's not the direction they're going in with that. The battlefields and the plexes are where we want to be to fight, and that's where you make your money, is going where you want to fight. So but yeah,
to that final point, you can't, and this is probably as much for anyone that's watching this that's kind of like a CSM hopeful, I guess, more than anything, right? Like, the CSM is ultimately a focus. To me, it's a focus group.
It's a focus group, yeah.
Some people call it advisory. I go with focus group.
That's a nice an unpaid focus group.
I mean, most focus groups unpaid. I don't know.
I don't know.
Ultimately, it is a focus group, and CCP will have a list of things they want to work on. Right, like they are a company, they will have their own kind of things planned up for the next like 2 or 3 years that they know they're going to go and look at, and that's their kind of arc of things they want to work on. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have conversations and they want to alter and change those things. But the most important thing is not turning up on day one and kind of going, you need to do this thing, because it's a really quick way for a developer just to go, I'm not going to listen to you now.
Right? Yeah. No. Absolutely.
Like and I'm not saying that just as a current CSM member. I'm saying that as an engineer in my day job. Right? If I had a group of people turn up that are not engineers, go, this is fixed. You need to fix this because it's terrible. Probably quite likely to just zone off of you and just go, oh, okay, I'm not going to talk to you now for the next 6 months, because that's not the point of the CSM, right?
Right. Absolutely. Awesome. So I want to make sure, how do we get a hold of you? Do you have any, do you go on Twitch? Do you have YouTubes, Twitter? Do you hang out on Discords?
So I'm always available on Discord. In fact, Discord is probably the easiest way just to message me. So I'm on your Discord. I'll stay on your Discord. I'm on TIS. I'm on the Evo Discord. You can generally track me down on most Eve Discords. So you should have fun there. If you Discord me a message, I will generally get back to you really quickly. You can email me. I do pick up emails and come back to it. There's a lot of spam emails, unfortunately, sometimes, so it takes a little bit more time. And I am doing a show at the moment with Phantomite and Redline. Their new show they started a couple of weeks back, so I will probably be on that most weeks for people that want to come have a chat with me then and there as well.
Awesome. Do you guys have a website for that yet, or?
I don't think so. I don't think he has a Discord server for it yet. There's a public Discord server. I think it's still running out of the old cesspool Discord server that he had, which I wouldn't advise going into if you don't know what it is. It's not a safer workplace.
Cool. I look forward to that. Definitely want to. I always encourage more podcasts. It's getting lighter and lighter. Ever since the casinos left, it feels like we don't have the Eve content that once existed in this game.
I think it's that. I think a lot of the player base gets older, right? And that's kind of comes back to the new player part, right? Of having to need to funnel in new blood, because the veterans kind of grow up, get to an age, realise, oh, I've got other stuff I need to go and do now, right? I can't sit in the stream every day.
Well, so soon though. I mean, if Eve had survived like another 20 years, then we're gonna be getting so old that it'll be like, oh, it'll be back to Eve for us because we're at the old folks' home.
It'll be quite interesting, actually, to see a load of returning players in 20 years' time. They're just returning because they've now retired and can play Eve again.
Right.
That would be quite funny to see.
I feel like it'll happen. I do. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for
This has
having me.
been really awesome, and I'm really glad to get the viewpoints from opposing 0.0 groups that seem to be pretty in line with each other. I don't see much of an adversarial interactions, at least with your platforms. It definitely seems like you guys are fighting for things that are not necessarily, they're definitely, you're gonna fight for things that you care about and that are affecting your gameplay. But it sounds like you have like an understanding of how your gameplay is affecting, and just owning the entire galaxy, half the galaxy, or it's not healthy for the game.
No, it's not. And I think the thing is, from a purely empire building perspective, like we want to have wars of like conquest and things like that to write these stories about, not to keep it forever and all the rest of it. But if there's only two big mega groups or three big mega groups where you can't have those wars because they're too big, you don't get a chance to write those stories.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you all also for listening and who are watching. And we will be doing a little bit more streaming. We have some more interviews that are going to be coming up here. Looks like in about 2 hours. So we're going to probably take a little bit of a break, but then we'll be back and do some PvP until we get some more interviews to come on. So thank you all. Thank you, Luke, for coming on, and have a
Thank you for having
great
me.
night.
Cheers, night. Everyone have a good night.